Hello, welcome back, and today we're going to talk about the French and Indian War in American history. And this war is going to be a defining moment in American colonial history. It really is the first true moment in which we start to see the development of a truly distinct American character, and the ramifications of the French and Indian War on the American colonies, which we will see later on, are going to lead directly to the American Revolution. So let's move ahead, and this particular lecture will cover section 3.1 in the AP Guide and analyzes the causes and consequences of the French and Indian War on the American colonies. Now, what caused the French and Indian War? Well, if we were to kind of put it in its most simplest form, the answer to that is George Washington. Pictured here. It's always interesting to see these images here. This is a representation of a young George Washington. George Washington is a colonel in the Virginia militia. He's rather bitter about the fact that he had not been selected to be an officer in the regular army. He married up. He married a wealthy woman, and was the owner of a tremendous amount of land, slave owner, plantation owner. And during this time, the backstory is that the people of Virginia were very interested in expanding their territory because they needed to. They were expanding their agricultural interests. It was a heavy tobacco area. Also, hemp was a big crop, and they needed more land to grow more product. So they were looking across the Appalachian Mountains, and they saw these nice lush fields in Ohio. So they wanted to get some of those nice lush fields in Ohio. Problem: these nice lush fields in Ohio were claimed by the French and also some Native Americans. So this is really going to be an issue for the English. They want these lands. They need these lands. These lands are very, very profitable. But the French are not just going to give over their lands. The French are now starting to establish their own agricultural centers in these lands. They need them because much of their productive output is now being drawn from the sugar plantations in the Caribbean. But the sugar plantations in the Caribbean don't grow food. So in order to feed the people growing the sugar in the Caribbean, you needed to grow wheat in the American Northwest and ship it to the Caribbean to support the sugar colonies there. Why didn't they just grow food in the sugar colonies? Well, come on. But either way, this was the process. The French are very interested in the land. The English are interested in the land. Well, the French start building forts. One of those forts was a fort called Fort Duquesne. And George Washington was sent there to kind of, push the French out and away from Fort Duquesne. He goes out there. He captures a French contingent and is interrogating the officer of that contingent, a fellow by the name of Jumonville. And he has his Indian allies with him, a guy by the name of by the name Half King. I'm not sure if that was a name or title, but either way, that's how he's referred. During the interrogation, Half King takes out a club and belts Jumonville on the head and splatters his head like a melon, kills him. Well, Washington's in a little bit of trouble. He's not going to be able to take the fort with his group, so he starts a retreat. And he finds a nice little plain somewhere, builds a fort that becomes known as Fort Necessity, and because it was just necessary to build a fort, and this becomes known as the Fort Necessity Incident, in that Washington sets up this fort. It's a really ill-designed, poorly planned fort, relatively in low ground, where people can just kind of shoot into the fort, relatively close to the woods, where people can kind of find cover and fire. Not a particularly good place. Also, it starts to rain. And if you know anything about muskets in the rain, they don't fire very well. So ultimately what's going to happen is another French contingent under the command of a fellow by the name of Jumonville happened to be the original Jumonville's brother, captures the fort and takes George Washington hostage, and George Washington is not allowed to leave until he signs a piece of paper that turned out to be a confession for the murder of Jumonville. Well, now this is a real problem, and this is a source of contention among historians. Did George Washington actually intentionally sign a murder confession? There's a lot of debate on the subject. The letter's written in French. He may have thought that he was only signing a paper that made him responsible for the death of Jumonville, which is a different thing than murder. Either way, it doesn't really matter, because this letter then gets brought back to France, where it is waved around and said, hey, this guy admitted to murder. And this, of course, is going to mobilize the forces of the French forces and the English forces into combat. There was already tensions going on, but this particular war will be known as the French and Indian War in the colonies. However, it will be known as the 7 Years' War in Europe. Well, either way, if you read about the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War, same war, right? Now, at the same time, you got to understand that this stuff was going on at the same time. It wasn't necessarily cause-effect. At the same time, the colonies all got together. They all met in Albany, New York, in the colony of New York. And the idea was, what are we going to do about the growing power of the French in the American Northwest? So, among the plans that was presented was a plan from an elder statesman by the name of Benjamin Franklin. We talked about him in an earlier lecture. And he came up with what became known as the Albany Plan of Union, or in some texts is referred to as Benjamin Franklin's Plan of Union. The idea of this was to unite the colonies and tax the colonies, to provide for a common defense of the colonies. We can kind of see this. This is a famous icon of the time, which is usually erroneously. Let me see if I can move it around. Which is usually erroneously applied to the American Revolution. In fact, this was pre-Revolution. This had to do with the Albany Plan of Union. The idea was that if the colonies didn't join together, they would ultimately perish. They would ultimately fall to the French. But the colonies were not all that interested in this whole idea of, one, they were afraid of being taxed. Why should people in Georgia be taxed to defend the colonies in New York, and vice versa? Why should the colonies of New York be taxed to defend the colonies in Georgia when they can provide for their own defense? They were also not all this into the idea of giving up authority to a different body. Why would the government of Virginia want to give up authority over its own militia, for instance, to, say, the colony of Connecticut? They wouldn't want to do that. So, ultimately, the Albany Plan of Union fails. But it's still significant in that this is really the first time that we see the colonies coming together, meeting together in a common area, and trying to make different decisions for the colonies as a whole. It was a miserable failure, but it was a step in the right direction. Now, ultimately we do end up in a war that lasted 7 years. This is not a little war. This is a significant war. The wars that we've talked about up to now have only lasted about a year, 2 years. This was a significant deal. So for 7 years, the French and the British were going after each other. And for the most part, as far as the French had their allies, and the British had their allies, to the point where some historians actually consider this to be really maybe the First World War, because this was a war that literally encompassed a lot of different nations, and also because these nations were global empires, these wars were fought all over the world. But primarily in Europe and North America. France was allied with Spain and Austria, and they were also allied with many of the Algonquin and Ohio Indian tribes. The British, on the other hand, had allied themselves with a rising power from the Germanic states called Prussia. And they're also going to create some alliances with the Iroquois. The Iroquois are very interesting because it can be said that at this point in time, the Iroquois are at the height of their power. And they're negotiating, and they're playing the politics of this time. And the Iroquois are going to see an advantage. Some of the Iroquois, not all of them, we're going to see this in just a minute, are going to see an advantage of siding with the British. Other Iroquois are going to see an advantage in siding with the French. We'll see how that works out. So here's an example. Now this is a primary source from a chief called Cayende. Cayende was one of the Iroquois chiefs, and he is arguing his case before the Iroquois Council. He says, "My brothers, why have you deserted me? Why have you deserted your friends, the French? Are you so blinded that you do not know where your greatest interests lie? Can you not see what the future of the Iroquois League must be if the English drive the French away? We will be finished. Our league will be dissolved, our lands taken bit by bit, and we will either have to merge with the English and lose our identity and our pride, or we will be pushed back until we have no more lands at all and are destroyed." Wow, very, very powerful stuff. Look at some of the things that he's saying here. Of course, he is referencing the very powerful Iroquois League, and he's very concerned. If we drive the French away, we will be finished. Why? Why might that be a problem? What is it about the French? It's not necessarily that they're allied with the French per se, but the idea is that, well, the Iroquois up to this point have been doing a really good job of, kind of playing the English and the French off of each other and empowering themselves in that way, and it's worked pretty well. But you can't really play the English and the French off of each other if there are no French, right? It really becomes problematic. Also, they understand that the biggest check against increasing English power is the fact that the French are there to kind of provide a check against this. And Cayenne is quite correct in pointing out, hey, without the French, there's nothing really stopping the English from growing. Now, other Iroquois leaders at this time have a different perspective. One of them responds to Cayenne by saying he can't smell the winds and realize that the British are the ones that are going to win this war. Accurately making that prediction. And then we want to be on the side of the winning team. And that's really the only way. If we're on the side of the losing team, we're going to end up losing our territories. It's a tough call. It will turn out, though, that Cayende will be correct. The French and Indian War will be the pinnacle of Iroquois power, and after this, they will start to decline, almost exclusively as a result of this war. Now, things went really, really bad for the British at first. It was not a pretty sight for the British at first. The British are ultimately going to be beaten up really bad. General Braddock is going to try to take Fort Duquesne. It'll go horribly, horribly wrong. The French will win most of their battles. And also, an interesting group of folks during this time were this group called the Acadians. Now, the Acadians were a French-speaking people in the British colonies. Their lands had been taken over by the British in one of the wars. I believe it was King William's War or whatever. And they were French-speaking people that were under the dominion of the King of England. And of course, when the time came to fight the French, the Acadians said, "Hey, you're part of the British Empire. You're going to have to help us fight." And the Acadians were French people, French-speaking and French-identifying people, and they said, "We're not going to do that. We're not going to take up arms against our brother Frenchmen." And therefore, the Acadians who were living up in the eastern Canadian region were said, "All right, well then you got to get out. You got to go, because you're no longer welcome in the British in the British colonies, and they were expelled. They were kicked out of their homes. The Acadians will travel south, and they will seek refuge in a relatively neutral place, a city called New Orleans, and the Acadians will take on a different identity. They will be referred to as Cajuns, and this is where the Cajun culture is going to develop. Well, anyway, that being said, things were going pretty badly for the French until we see this strapping this strapping fellow here. Where's my magic pen? This is William Pitt, and now William Pitt is going to be given credit for organizing the ultimate British victory of the French and Indian War. Spoiler alert: the British win. And some of the things that he's going to do, for instance, he decides one of the things that he's going to do is, look, all of the fighting that's taking place in Europe, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to the Prussian army. The Prussian army is a very capable and very strong army. The British, on the other hand, are going to focus all of their attention in North America. William Pitt believed correctly that the war started in North America and will be won in North America, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus our military in North America. So he sends 20,000 British regular army, your redcoats, into North America to help fight, alongside the militia during this time. He also says, you know what we need to do? The economy of the colonies is getting kind of shaky as a result of this war. So he did a couple things. One is he's going to extend loans to the colonies to help improve their economy. And he's also going to tell the colonies, hey, look, we're going to fight this on our own dime. You don't have to pay any of this stuff back. Which is going to encourage more of the colonies to participate in the war and hopefully get, the things that they get out of the war outweigh the cost of actually participating in the war. And another interesting thing that William Pitt is going to do is he's actually going to negotiate with the Indians. He's going to negotiate specifically with the Iroquois and the Indians of the Ohio Valley and say, hey, look, we will establish set boundaries in which British colonists will not be allowed to cross. And you'll be able to stay there forever and live there forever. So many of the Indians thought, oh, well, this is a great deal. The English are actually telling us they're not going to mess with us if we help them beat the French in this war. So with these particular strategies in place, William Pitt is ultimately going to be victorious. You will have some very important victories are going to take place in Quebec and Montreal. These cities will fall to the British. In Havana, Cuba, the British Navy is going to take over the harbor. And ultimately the French are going to have to sue for peace. This peace will come in what is called the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Be really, really careful with this. Alrighty? This is 1763. You got to make sure that you're clear on this. There are a whole bunch of treaties of Paris. So if you go and do a Google search, what was the Treaty of Paris? You might come up with an answer that isn't accurate. You want to be specific and say Treaty of Paris, 1763. Bada boom, bada bing, we're good. So what was this Treaty of Paris? Well, look, the French weren't in a position to negotiate. They'd been beaten pretty badly, ultimately. So, in essence, the Treaty of Paris said, hey, French, sorry, you're going to lose it all. It's all gone. All of French North American territories are going to be wiped out. Now, remember, the French controlled much of Canada and what becomes the Northwest Territories and the Mississippi River Valley. It's a huge, huge chunk of real estate. And here, they lose it all. All gone. Gone. All right? Well, what are we going to do with these colonies? Well, here is the Mississippi River. Do it in red. Here's the Mississippi River. Everything to the east of the Mississippi River is going to go to Britain. Probably should have done that in green. Let's try that again. Britain. Maybe I should have done it in black, but that's all right. All right, so all of the territory to the east of the Mississippi River, with one exception, we'll talk about that in a second, is going to go to Britain. All of the stuff to the west is going to go to Spain. Wait a minute! I thought Spain was France's ally. What happened? Oh, well, they pretty much said, hey, Spain, you drop out, and we'll give you some of the, you leave France holding the bag, we'll give you some of the booty, and Spain went sold, and they just kind of dropped out. So there it is. So Spain is going to get all of that to the west. Now, also, Spain will also get New Orleans, which is why the Acadians are going to go down there and settle in New Orleans. And in exchange for New Orleans, Britain will get from Spain Florida. Florida will be turned over to Britain. This is a huge, huge realignment of colonial empires in North America. I mean, it shifts millions of acres worth of real estate around between empires. This is big. France is gone. Remember, many of these people who lived in this region were French-speaking people, French cultural people, but many of them had never actually been to France. They were born and raised in the Mississippi River Valley. They were Americans. So what's going to happen to them? Well, many of them are just going to stay put. Spain kind of got short shrift here because much of this area was controlled by very, very warlike Indians. So this is a huge alignment for North America. Britain now is going to have, as a result of this war, absolute uncontested control of the seas. They're going to be able to sail their ships anywhere they want to in the Atlantic without any inconvenience whatsoever. It's a huge, huge advantage for the British. So now, what are some of the consequences of this particular war? Well, some of the consequences of this war involve the fact that British colonial security is now assured. They don't have to worry about the French anymore. For the most part, because many of the Native American tribes no longer have the support of the French, they don't have to really worry about the Native Americans anymore. Maybe not. All right. So we see this, and of course, if the colonies are more stable, then they're going to be more marketable. They're going to be more profitable. We also start to see British resentments of the colonials. When the British soldiers came to North America, and they're fighting next to the colonials, they're seeing a relatively undisciplined kind of loutish group of people that they're fighting with alongside, and they ended up with a very negative attitude with regard to American militia. They thought they were a kind of ragamuffin group, and they lost a lot of respect for the American militia. Well, that's not going to last very long. But for the most part, a lot of British are resenting the fact that they also had to pay an awful lot of money to secure the colonies, to get this colonial security established. That mostly came out of the pockets of English taxpayers in England. British colonials also learned to resent the British regulars. The British regulars kind of lauded over the colonists their superior status as British regulars. After all, you are just colonials. We are from the home country, the mother country. And they did such a great job of looking down at the British colonials that many of the British colonials said, hey, wait a minute, we don't need this stuff. We won your war for you. Was that accurate? Probably not. But still, it was a perspective of the time that if it hadn't been for American militia might, this war wouldn't have been won. And there's an argument to be made there. And it also created Native American resentments. The Native Americans who had been allied with the French, for instance, when the French surrendered and they gave up all of their land, all of that land gets turned over to England. If we go back to the map, where's the Native American possessions? Well, they're not there. They just arbitrarily decided that all of this is France and all of this is Spain. And the Native American peoples who were living there were like, well, wait a minute. We didn't surrender. You didn't negotiate with us. We are still fighting. We can still fight this. And they also had a kind of an understandable resentment against both the French and the British at this point. And also, William Pitt had made this promise not to establish clear boundaries between English possessions and Native American possessions, and he didn't quite honor that promise. So there's going to be some resentments as far as that is concerned. And ultimately, this is going to lead to more conflict with Native Americans. Most importantly, this handsome devil here. Oops. I want my magic pen. Hold on now. Let me do my magic pen. I want my magic pen. Here we go. There he is. This handsome devil here, Chief Pontiac. Chief Pontiac is a member of the Ottawa tribe and an Ohio Indian tribe, and he is going to be a student or a disciple of a fellow by the name of Neoline. Neoline is basically a prophet who comes up and says, "Hey, look, all of the problems that Native people are having, we're having because we've adopted European ways. We've been corrupted by European influences, and therefore we are weak, and we are no longer in the good graces of the gods of the Holy, the Great Spirit, or whatever." So he said, "What we need to do is we need to get rid of all of our all of our European ways, go back to traditional ways, and we will ultimately be able to defeat the English." And Pontiac is going to take this very seriously, and what we're going to get out of this is what's called Pontiac's Rebellion. Pontiac is going to see English encroachments into the Ohio Valley. The English are going to be taking on more and more land, and he's going to say, "Hey, you need to stop," and they're going to say, "Yeah, well, try to stop us." So he did. He tried to stop them. And this is going to be a major, significant rebellion, burning villages, killing, villagers and townspeople, and attacking, colonial forts and settlements along the frontier. And ultimately, he will be stopped by the Royal Military. But also another thing that's going to come out of this is a lot of the folks who are back home in England are going to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we can't keep fighting these Indians. This is getting out of hand. Let's just hold to our agreements." So what was done was a border was drawn along the Appalachian Mountains, and this became the Proclamation Line. And this was known as the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And the agreement was that all of this land that was won from France, in essence, was going to be set aside as reserve for the Native Americans. That the British colonists would not trespass and would not take any of the lands outside of that proclamation line. Oh, wait a minute. What started this whole thing? Do we remember? Do we not remember that the whole point was to get this Ohio River Valley for farming and for expanding these plantations that had grown up in Virginia and other colonies? How do we win a war and lose? Which is what many of the American colonists at the time were saying. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean we can't have access to that land? See where this is going? We already are now starting to see a conflict between the interests of the Crown and the interests of England, which frankly had an interest in not fighting Indian wars in North America, and the needs and desires of the colonists who want access to these lands. And many of the colonists are saying, "Wait a minute, you're not even asking us our opinion on this. We don't have any representation in this. You're just making these decisions." And you can probably see where things are going to get worse from here. So, during this unit, we will talk about the American Revolution, the French and Indian War was a leading contributor to what ultimately would become the American Revolution. So talk to you next time, and I hope you got something out of it.